Solving Internet Explorer 8 security issues. As I'm sure you know, Windows 7 comes bundled with Internet Explorer 8. As of this recording in February 2010, IE8 is the latest and greatest edition of this web browser. Historically, Internet Explorer has been the subject of, well, if not ridicule, at least severe criticism on the security flaw front. To this end, we're going to look at how IE8 goes a long way for fixing and addressing a lot of those previous security issues. And there's a lot of new features here that you need to be aware of as desktop support technicians who are supporting Internet Explorer 8 in business. In particular, in this nugget, we're going to look at security zones and trusted sites. We'll look at several of the so-called advanced options in Internet Explorer. We'll review web slices and accelerators and all of that good stuff. So by the time you finish this nugget, you'll be very secure, I hope, in how IE works. We'll look at add-ins, also called plugins, digital certificates, and group policy management. I'm even going to throw in a little bonus, and we're going to review the Internet Explorer Administration Kit, also affectionately called EEK. First, let's take a look and review security zones. This has been a feature of Internet Explorer web browser for a few versions now, but we need to cover it because this content will certainly appear on your 685 exam. Now, depending upon where the user goes in his or her Internet Explorer instance, they're going to navigate to different websites. Some are actually out on the World Wide Web. Perhaps your business has one or more intranet or internal websites that the user accesses. Depending upon the IP address that the site is attached to, each site is going to appear or be associated automatically with a security zone. We can view the current security zone by looking at the status bar of Internet Explorer. The Internet zone is the catch-all bucket. This is the default zone to which a URL or domain is applied if it doesn't fit in any of the other zones. The thing about the Internet zone is that you cannot consciously add sites to the Internet zone. It's just an automatic deal that if you go out to google.com, for instance, you can rest assured that unless you put google.com domain in the trusted site zone, it will wind up in the Internet zone. If you browse on the local network and hit a website on your internal LAN, then dollars to donuts IE8 will recognize that domain and that address as belonging to the local intranet zone. You can populate this if you want to, as you can populate the trusted sites and restricted sites lists. Now, the more important question is, what's the functional difference among these four different security zones? Basically, we're concerned with the level at which the browser is accepting things like ActiveX controls, Java applets, client-side scripts like JavaScripts, and so on. Of course, it presents a security hazard because any code that comes down from a web server and is run on the client side, there's the issue of under whose security credentials does that code run, and if it's a malicious code coming from a bad person, let's say, what exactly is that script doing? If you've worked with the ActiveX framework, or if you've done work with Java applet building or JavaScript, or other client-side scripts, these can go out into the file system, they can go out onto the internet, you can program them to your heart's content. So it certainly makes sense that we want to control the scope that these active code technologies have in the browser. Now in Internet Explorer 8, this has really been addressed, I think, very well, not only with security zones that have predefined default levels of allowance of these active codes. Basically, trusted sites is going to allow most active technologies to run in the browser. This is empty by default, and you'll want to be really careful and instruct your users to be really careful which domains they add into trusted sites. Restricted sites is just the opposite. These are known dangerous sites. Well, hopefully the user's not even going to a known dangerous site. But domains in here are going to run with extra security, and just about no active code will be allowed to run. In fact, one reason why many IT folks like to use a non-IE browser, say Mozilla Firefox, is because one requirement of the ActiveX control is that your user agent or web browser be Internet Explorer. Therefore, Firefox has an inherent security in it inasmuch as it simply will not recognize, much less run, ActiveX technology, and also by default allows you to cut off other scripts as well. There's an excellent extension for Firefox, by the way, called NoScript that you might want to look at. So we know trusted sites are for sites that we know and trust, and we want to allow that code to run. run. Restricted sites, just the opposite. Intranet is kind of striking a reasonable balance. The default setting there is certainly lower than what you get with the internet setting, because it's presumed that if the user's browsing local intranet websites, then we want those client-side code objects to run. Now, protected mode is especially cool. Basically, this is enabled by default in IE. You can selectively disable it per zone, although I certainly wouldn't recommend it. Take-home message with protected mode, friends, is that when Internet Explorer runs in protected mode, it's tying the Internet Explorer process into user account control. And functionally, and actually, Internet Explorer process runs with low privileges, super low privileges. And you have what's called folder virtualization happening, such that Internet Explorer, by default, when it's in protected mode, is not going to, well, the operating system, Windows 7, is not going to allow Internet Explorer to write to most areas of the file system. You wind up, if you do allow code to run or do allow content to come down, protected mode will virtualize that or put it in kind of a temporary staging area. Now, if you add a domain to trusted sites, then you'll actually be storing those objects permanently. Another advantage of protected mode that's really cool is the fact that even if malicious code does breach your computer, the maximum privilege level it will have is, as an IE process, is super low. And you'll actually be prompted to install ActiveX controls. You'll be prompted to do just about anything that involves running client-side code. So that's the tie-in with user account control. And of course, this brings in an educational feature for us desktop support technicians. We need to train our users not to just blindly accept UAC or protected mode prompts. We want to educate them to actually be very skeptical of what's going on, and if they have any question of what the UAC prompt is asking them to do or allow, have them contact you. Now, I've been using Microsoft Internet Explorer since version 1.0, and I've also been a loyal Mozilla Firefox user for many, many years now, and it's interesting the trending, how Internet Explorer becomes more and more Firefox-ish with each successive version of the software. I mean, as of Internet Explorer 7, we have tabbed browsing, and that certainly continued into IE8. And more now we're getting functionality, especially the idea of the add-in, which we'll look at a little bit later in this nugget. The idea is that the user can extend the functionality of their browser to emphasize whatever the user wants to. They can add content or add add-ins to improve the security of the browser, perhaps to accentuate anonymity, whatever that is, perhaps some features to accelerate web browsing, web searching, this kind of stuff, Web 2.0, etc. All right, so let's take a look in this whiteboard of some stuff that's been around for a long time, like cookies and pop-up blocker, and then some brand new functionality in IE8. In a nutshell, you recall, I'm sure, a cookie is a plain text file that's set by a web server and readable only by that web server that set the cookie, that's intended to provide a more customized user experience. It can save user state information. From a security standpoint, generally speaking, we're concerned more with what are called tracking cookies. First-party cookies are cookies that are set by the domain where you visit. Let's say you visit, just to pick on monster.com for a second. Now, I have no idea if they use third-party cookies. I'm just using this domain as an example. Monster.com may set a cookie on your hard drive to save some or all of your state data, perhaps your username and login, which is another security implication. Now, third-party cookies come in if, for instance, there's a banner advertisement on Monster.com. Monster might allow that third-party advertiser to set a cookie on your computer. There, some folks get up in arms because it's presumed that since we're intentionally visiting Monster.com, we're implicitly or explicitly allowing a cookie to be set, but we didn't get asked about this third-party cookie. Especially things get hairy if that same advertiser appears on another job site. Let's say we go to careerbuilder.com. There's another banner ad from the same advertising company. Remember, the only party that can read the cookie is the domain that set it. Since the second banner ad was set by the same domain, they can revisit the cookie and literally track your progress among different sites. Now, how is this used in, quote, legitimate marketing? Well, so these folks can gather demographic information and usage patterns to make decisions for their own company, as well as perhaps selling those demographic data sets to other advertisers, etc. It's all about the Benjamins. It's all about the money. Bottom line is Internet Explorer 8, as IE 7 did, gives us control on our cookies, and we'll look at that in the demo. Pop-up advertisements are always annoying. Fortunately, they're largely a thing of the past unless the site owner is being really devious using JavaScript and other technologies to create pop-ups where you don't have a close button, etc. However, that harkens back to the security zone and how tightly we're locking down code. But IE8 includes a pop-up blocker. Now, as far as the new technologies go, this first thing, in-private browsing, and then there's a related in-private technology called in-private filtering. And this technology supports the notion of the private or anonymous web. First thing I need you to know as a technical professional is that in-private browsing and in-private filtering are not anonymizers. The user who turns on in-private browsing and or filtering still is going to have his or her IP address or the IP address of your proxy server if you're doing what's called network address translation or NAT recorded on those destination web servers. So you'd have to go with a third-party solution to actually pursue anonymous web browsing. Rather, what in-private does is, for instance, if you were using a kiosk workstation and public access workstation, shared workstation, and you wanted to ensure that none of your browsing data, your personal browsing data, is saved on disk. Stuff like cookies, stuff like form data, usernames, passwords, names, addresses, telephone, your actual history, the pages that you visited in the session, and then the actual pages, the temporary internet files. So if we turn on in-private browsing, you get a new tab, and as long as you stay on the tab where in-private is marked, you'll see in the demo how that works. Microsoft's pretty obvious about it. You can rest assured that Microsoft is keeping most of this data in memory or in virtualized folder locations, and after you close the tab, it all goes up the flue. It goes away. In-private filtering is more of a persistent technology, and this is where you can suppress your personal information from being sent to advertisers who want to gather that extra data that you feel is none of their business to have. Also, when you do in-private browsing, I guess this is just to ensure that Internet Explorer has as much control over the browsing environment as possible. You're not allowed to use any extensions, browser extensions, or additional toolbars, and that just makes sense, really. Next, we have the Internet Explorer 8 accelerators. These are basically browser-based smart tags. Smart tags were they're still around, a fairly controversial technology that Microsoft rolled out in an earlier edition of Microsoft Office, and it's a selection-based search technology. That is to say, the way smart tags worked in earlier versions of Microsoft Office were that, for instance, you could have a date in your Microsoft Word document, select the date by highlighting it, and you get a little pop-up icon, and then you could perhaps open up your Outlook calendar on that date and do other related technologies based on your selection. It's controversial for many reasons, one being, again, that confidentiality aspect. How much data is being sent to Microsoft, and what other things could a malicious user do by taking advantage of smart tags? Anyway, that's not in our focus. Accelerators are like smart tags. They're ways that you can select text on a web page. Again, you get a little arrow pop-up, and it provides an extensible framework. For instance, you could highlight a word and use a Wikipedia accelerator to look up that selected word or phrase in Wiki. Or you could highlight an address, bring up your accelerators, and go to Google Maps or Bing Maps, you see? So they're actually pretty helpful. It's one of those things that you're wondering what the heck is going on when you first see it, and once you take the time to learn about it, it's actually pretty cool. You can download accelerators that do many things. Actually, the application programming interface for both accelerators and web slices is in the public domain, so if you're a developer, you can actually build your own accelerators or slices. If you're familiar with really simple syndication, or RSS, and or the live bookmark feature of Mozilla Firefox, then you're a long way to discovering what web slices are. Web slices are a way to set a bookmark on your Internet Explorer favorites bar such that it's updated regularly, just like an RSS feed is. For instance, we could look at a web slice for dig.com, and each time we hit the button, it drops down a menu that shows the 10 most popular digged stories, you see? It's a little bit more graphical intensive or more informative than just a straight RSS feed, which tends to just give you post headlines. Here you can actually see little thumbnail previews and additional metadata. It's actually pretty cool. Again, one of those things that you don't know how cool it is until you dig under the hood and take a look, which we will in the upcoming demo. Not only from a security standpoint, but more globally from a web development standpoint, there's been issues in terms of Microsoft's implementation of World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, and IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, web standards. Things like XHTML, which is Extensible Hypertext Markup Language, cascading style sheet selectors, even extensible markup language. The idea is we want all of our internet vendors to be working off the same framework, and the big deal there, of course, is cross-browser, cross-platform compatibility. And Microsoft, quite frankly, has been a little bit shaky in terms of their adherence to known standards in the web community. Finally, in Internet Explorer 8, we see more conformance, really, and fewer Microsoft proprietary extensions to these protocols than ever before. However, that brings up kind of the problem in reverse. Instead of websites breaking because Microsoft has filled their code and filled their browser, their parser, with all sorts of proprietary extensions, now it's the case that in Internet Explorer 8, we might see page layouts breaking, say text flows that are overlapping or maybe just the opposite, too far apart, stuff like that, because the site has been built for Internet Explorer 7, which includes a lot of that Microsoft proprietary stuff. And then when we view the site in IE8, which is much more standards compliant, we get these layout anomalies. So to address that, we have what are called compatibility views. And the way this works is when you see a page that is not rendering the way it should under IE8, it was obviously a site that was designed with IE7 in mind, you can look at your browser address bar and you'll see this little icon of a broken sheet of paper. What you can do here then is click that button to switch the page in IE7 compatibility view. Now clicking that little button is kind of an ad hoc way to go. You can also open up the compatibility view settings, and just like you can associate domains or websites with security zones, we can do the same thing with compatibility view. In this case, for instance, we're putting xbox.com in our compatibility view list such that every time we visit that domain from then on, the site is rendered in an IE7 compatibility mode, which should hopefully improve the layout and the functionality of the site. Final thing I want to say about this is that you can actually download compatibility view domain updates from Windows Update. So it's not just a case of hit or miss where you or your users discover sites that need to be in this list. You can actually bring down updates of domains that Microsoft already knows have compatibility problems and receive those lists via Windows Update. It's pretty cool. In our first demo, we're going to look first at security zones and make sure we understand how those work functionally, and then we'll look at those advanced options, keeping an eye always on our focus here in this nugget, which is improving Internet Explorer security. We'll take a look at compatibility views, slices, the in-private feature, the accelerators, and perhaps we'll even throw in some extras there. Let's go have some fun together. Let's just pop right in here on our first demo by opening up Internet Explorer. We'll hit up the icon down on the taskbar. Now that we've got the site open, why don't we start by looking at security zones. We'll open the Tools option, come down to Internet Options, navigate over to Security. Basically, we're just validating that this has not changed since previous versions of Internet Explorer. Here are those 4 zones, and you'll notice that each one has a default security level. Internet is medium-high, and it describes what happens with each one of these. Local intranet is medium-low, trusted is medium, and restricted sites is high. Now, if we go to custom level, this is where you can see specifically which settings are inactive for that particular security zone. We see references to XPS, .NET Framework components, prompting for file downloads, font downloads, a lot of stuff. Some of it gets pretty cryptic if you're not a web developer yourself. To add sites to the trusted sites or restricted site zone is just as easy as selecting one of those two, clicking the Sites button, and then adding a domain. For instance, I'll add cbtnuggets.com. You can optionally require HTTPS for that site, by leaving that checked. I'm going to uncheck that. We'll close. And now if I browse to CB2 Nuggets, we see down in the status bar that this site is a trusted site. You can double click the status bar entry to come back to the Internet Security Properties area. Now you notice on my system that sites in the Internet Zone have protected mode turned on. The other ones don't, except for, of course, restricted sites. So this means if I go to another site, like let's say Google.com, this shows up in the Internet Zone and protected mode is on, which is a good thing for sure. Now, to put a site in compatibility view, we can hover over the little broken paper icon. The pop-up text tells us that websites designed for older browsers will often look better, and so on. We can give that a click. And if we're in compatibility view, we get a little pop-up that tells us that this domain is now part of compatibility view. If we open the Tools menu, come down to Compatibility View Settings, this invokes that dialog box where we can add additional domains if we want to. MSN.com's kind of silly, but I'm just doing that as an example. Down at the bottom, include updated website lists from Microsoft. By ticking this option, this takes advantage of Windows Update to bring down live settings from Microsoft. Display intranet sightings in compatibility view. You might want to turn that off if your intranet sites have already been built for IE8, or display all websites in compatibility view. Seems a little dramatic. Next, let's take a look at web slices. By default in Internet Explorer 8, you see this web slice gallery option on the favorites bar. If you open that up, you see a little informational blurb and then turn on subscribing to websites. You can also make these options the very first time you launch Internet Explorer 8, you get that first run wizard. I bypassed that the first time I opened the browser here because I wanted to show you how to enable or disable these different features individually. So if we turn on automatic feed updates, otherwise known as web slices, it gives us Hulu here by default, and if we give that a click, we can go out onto the add-ons gallery, or alternatively, do a Google search, or in this case a Bing search. Remember, Bing is the default search provider in Internet Explorer 8. Do a search for download web slices, and that'll take you specifically to ieaddons.com, which is the official Internet Explorer 8 portal. And we can just see what we've got. Dig's main page top 10. That looks good. So we're going to add this into the favorites bar, and you'll notice it shows right up here. And if we give that a click, we now see the top topics for Dig. So that's pretty cool. That's the whole idea of the web slice, just as simple as that. As far as the in-private feature goes, if we open the safety menu and choose in-private filtering, it's turned off by default unless during the first run wizard you enable it. It tells us here if we visit a website that contains content from a third party, we can choose to block or let me choose which providers receive my information. That's what I'll choose. And it brings you, as soon as you do that, to the in-private filtering configuration dialog box. There's nothing there yet, but basically the big deal here is you can automatically block that information from going to a third-party provider or be selective about it. To come back to those filtering settings, we can open the safety menu, come down to in-private filtering settings, and customize from there. If we want to turn off in-private filtering, we can just select it. By the way, while we're in safety, I want to come down to Smart Screen Filter. This I didn't discuss in the whiteboard portion of the course, but I want to mention it now. In IE7, you had the phishing filter, P-H-I-S-H. These are malicious websites that are designed to look and act like legitimate ones, for instance like PayPal.com, but whose real purpose is to capture your logon credentials so that those malicious site owners can steal them and steal money for you. Now in Internet Explorer 8, we have the phishing filter renamed and expanded. It's now called the Smart Screen Filter. You can check individual websites and run it against Microsoft. That's what you would instruct users to do on an ad hoc basis. Or we can turn on the Smart Screen Filter, and it will, in the background, compare any websites that we visit to a list of known phishing sites that Microsoft is aware of. Cool. Alright, so we've covered Smart Screen Filter, in-private filtering. There's in-private browsing, as we've talked about before. This gives you either a new instance of Internet Explorer or a new tab. Here I've got an entirely new instance. Information tells us in-private is turned on, and we can see Microsoft is really obvious about when we're doing this. To turn off in-private browsing, close this browser window. So this is my private browser. Back here where I don't have in-private turned on, this is my, quote, public browser. Finally, let's take a look at accelerators. We select a word by double-clicking it. You see this little arrow icon pop up, and if we click the arrow icon, we can access our accelerators. These are just the built-in ones: blog with Windows Live, email with Windows Live, map with Bing, and you notice that some of them actually give you a flyout menu depending upon what you've selected. I'm just going to choose search with Bing here, and I had selected the word see. Kind of a bad example, but you get the general idea. I did a Bing search for CBT Nuggets address, and if I highlight this address, click my accelerator, map with Bing, I have myself that location. So that's the idea with accelerators. Of course, you can always do a Google search for download Internet Explorer accelerators, and one of the links there will take us to the Internet Explorer 8 Accelerator Gallery. Criticism that some have levied against Microsoft is that the accelerators available at the Microsoft websites are pretty centric toward Microsoft or Microsoft partners. You see Yahoo, map with Yahoo instead. So if I select that, map with Yahoo, we can add it in, and then the idea is we can access that accelerator from the list. You'll recall that a little bit earlier in this particular nugget, I mentioned the trending of Microsoft Internet Explorer to be more and more like Mozilla Firefox. One of those ways in particular is the notion of the add-on. In Firefox, these are called extensions. These are essentially code modules that, well, extend or add on to the core functionality of the browser. Now, while IE8 is nowhere near as extensible as Firefox, they've still done, when by they I mean Microsoft of course, has still done a good job of allowing the browser to be customized by IT pros and ordinary users. In the Manage Add-ons dialog box, you'll see that add-ons are classified into 4 categories. We have actual toolbars, as well as formal browser extensions, search providers, accelerators, and in-private filtering options. We've talked about just about all of these. I'd like to spend just a moment now talking about the quick search that allows us to swap out or add additional search providers to the list. As we'll see in the upcoming demo, this can be very helpful. Of course, by default, Microsoft is going to give us Bing, which is their own search engine. But if we feel that our users are better equipped with Google, we can do that. And of course, this API, Application Programming Interface, is available as well. So we could actually develop our own custom search providers to search our own corporate intranet sites. For instance, we might have a SharePoint portal, and we want to make it easier for our users to search it. Well, why not create an Internet Explorer 8 search provider and allow our users that convenience? Now, whenever we add external content to Internet Explorer, there's the possibility of reducing the security of the system, in particular with toolbars. The Google toolbar may be just fine, but unfortunately the trend in IT over the last several years is for folks to get perhaps a drive-by download or maybe just unwittingly download a toolbar. I know a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, sometimes when you install software, there's a little tick box, install such and so a toolbar, and if you, the user, or whomever just clicks next, before you know it, Internet Explorer has sprung a new toolbar. And some of these toolbars are less useful, to say the least, than others. Consequently, we as administrators have the ability, or frankly a user if they're a system administrator, to enable or disable selectively any of these add-ons. And as we're going to finish the nugget looking at enterprise management of IE8, we can make these decisions on allowed add-ons on a grand scale and set policy that all of our users, or perhaps selected subsets of our users, must follow in terms of allowing or denying certain add-ons. You might have also noticed in your Start menu in Windows 7 that you have at least 2 instances of the Internet Explorer icon. You have 3 if you're on a 64-bit machine. 64-bit would give you Internet Explorer 64-bit, Internet Explorer 32-bit, and then Internet Explorer with no add-ons. This provides an excellent way to troubleshoot problems if a user has installed an add-on that prevents Internet Explorer from starting up. Consider the Internet Explorer with no add-ons icon to represent a safe mode for Internet Explorer. The idea is you can start up really bare bones, access the add-ons management dialog box, disable, delete the rogue add-ons, and then restart normally. Finally, and this is just an unfortunate truth, 64-bit Internet Explorer does not support Flash and some other selected technologies. Unfortunately, we don't have a link up between Adobe and Microsoft that gives us Flash on a 64-bit platform, at least as of this recording in late February 2010. I hope that this situation is changed by the time you're watching this nugget, but that might be definitely something that your users might come to you with. Why aren't I able to watch this screencast? Well, have they launched the 64-bit or 32-bit version of IE? If they're looking at heavy-duty multimedia content, in particular Flash, they're going to need to go with the 32-bit version. Now let's take a brief look at digital certificates. The digital certificate, as previously discussed in this Nugget series, provides us essentially what's called in the info security world CIA. It's a triad methodology. You could look at it as a triangle if you want to, where C stands for confidentiality or encryption, I is integrity, and A is authentication. So the confidentiality means if we have an encrypted connection between the client's web browser and the web server, then we can, in theory, pass confidential data like passwords, usernames, credit card numbers, etc. over that channel and be reasonably certain that a man in the middle, or woman in the middle to be politically correct, cannot capture that data, or if they do capture it, they won't be able to decrypt it. So that's confidentiality. The integrity aspect offered by digital certificates is the fact we have, especially with Secure Sockets Layer, a bidirectional authentication process where by passing the digital certificate and the digital signature hash back and forth between the client and the server, these two machines can verify or validate each other's identity and the fact that the communication is, strictly speaking, happening just between those two machines. And again, we don't have an intermediary machine sitting in the middle trying to modify data packets. Well, actually, that's authentication, not integrity. That two-level authentication. Integrity, rather, sorry about the confusion if I've caused any. Data integrity means that no packet in between the client web browser and the web server has been captured and modified. By using integrity protocols, we can ensure that if a man in the middle did capture traffic, let's say that this was a banking transaction, and this guy over here wanted to reroute account numbers, query balances, maybe make a withdrawal, whatever they wanted to do, that would involve capturing data frames, modifying them, and then putting them back out onto the medium with, say, spoofed IP or MAC addresses. Well, with digital certificates, this would break those data packets, and it would then be obvious to the web server, if not the client web browser, that there was an interruption in communications. So that's the high-level view. Digital certificates allow encrypted, safe, authenticated traffic to occur in this context between a web browser on the client side and a web server on the server side. We know that digital certificates can be used for network authentication, they can be used for code signing, but in this context, to repeat one final time, we're dealing with essentially what's called a web server certificate to support secure e-commerce or just secure web traffic using the protocols Secure Sockets Layer and Secure Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is basically SSL over HTTP. What you're seeing on the right side of this whiteboard is a screen capture of the certificates dialog box from Internet Explorer 8, and this shows you the full certificate store for the local computer. Now, what's important in here is the Trusted Root Certification Authorities. This list can be added to, if you'll allow it, from Windows Update. The reason why this list is key, pun intended, I guess, in SSL and HTTPS communications is that that whole process of encryption, authentication, and integrity hinges on what's called a web of trust. And if we're selling software to a customer and they're buying it and giving us their credit card number, their web browser is going to want to do what it can to validate your digital certificate. And how is that done? Well, the chief way is to see who signed or issued your certificate. And so you want to make sure that your users have all of the world's most common, most popular certificate authorities in this list. And I'm also going to finish up by adding you also want to make sure that if you're using an internal or in-house public key infrastructure, that your own root certification authorities are in this list. And you can deploy those certificates to your users using group policy. Users can request the certificates themselves. It's beyond our scope to do this. I know that I've done a couple nugget series for CBT nuggets covering, for instance, the 7649 Windows Server 2008 upgrade. You can go and check those products out because I do cover Active Directory certificate services in a pretty good degree of detail there. Speaking of group policy, let's finish out the content of this nugget before we go into our second and final demo by looking at enterprise management of Internet Explorer 8. First, before we discuss EEC, let's look at group policy. Now, in terms of enhancing security and enforcing standardization in your enterprise, this is really the way to go. And what you see in the screenshot down here are the folders that contain the specific policies to cover what Microsoft calls Internet Explorer maintenance. So you notice that we can tweak out and standardize the user interface, title, bitmaps, logos. You can also configure the connection options if you're using a proxy. This is a really big security issue for a lot of companies. A company would have, for instance, a transparent proxy server that proxies or stands in the place of your user population and filters their traffic out to the World Wide Web. Some users, they're tech savvy admittedly, but you might have some employees in your organization who really want to go out to Facebook, who really want to go out to eBay, who really want to go out to MySpace, and they want to try to get around your proxy server, which is probably configured to reject those domains. One way that some employees can try to do this is point their Internet Explorer browser to a public proxy server, therefore appearing to be legitimate traffic that passes through your proxy. They attach to an external proxy server, and then they're free and clear in that connection to go to the forbidden site. One way to remediate against this is to use group policy and hard code your proxy settings. We also have URLs where we can tweak out favorites, links, we can do our security zones, and we can do external programs and add-ons. So the idea here is that group policy gives us very tight control over the user's ability to function with Internet Explorer. And there's ways with app blocker and software restriction policies to prevent users from installing, say, Opera or Mozilla Firefox or Apple Safari on your Windows network. I also want to say this, just a little bit about EEC. Internet Explorer Administration Kit's been around for, again, a long time, since version 5 of IE, if memory serves. And what EEC is, it's a framework for deploying a customized build of Internet Explorer 8. Now, it stands to reason since Windows 7 comes with IE8, we don't need EEC for Windows 7. You're using this to deploy IE8 on down-level clients like XP and even Vista, which comes with IE7, and server OSs. And again, what's cool about this is that you can actually then use software installation policy to deploy this customized package such that when the user gets IE8 upgraded on their system, it's already pre-done with all of your customized settings. In our second demo, we're going to consider add-in management. We'll look at the digital certificate store, and then we'll finish with enterprise administration, looking at group policy options for Internet Explorer maintenance, as well as the Internet Explorer administration kit. In this second demonstration, we'll start by looking at add-in management in Internet Explorer 8. To access those options, we'll open the Tools menu and select Manage Add-ons from this list. By the way, while we're here, I want you to see the pop-up blocker option. We can turn the pop-up blocker on or off, as well as visit its property sheet, which looks exactly to what it did in Internet Explorer 7. So we'll go to Manage Add-ons and let's see what we've got going on here. I don't have any toolbars or extensions loaded. I don't yet have any search providers, but actually let me fix that. You can open this quick search drop-down to see what search providers are there. You can manage those search providers, which simply brings you to the Manage Add-ons dialog, or we can choose Find More Providers to go again to ieaddons.com. I'm going to choose Google here. I'm going to make it my default search provider as well as use search suggestions for it. And what's cool now is we can go back to our add-ons, and now we should see, sure enough, Bing and Google. This is where you would reorder them. You can select the one that you want to move up or down the list. You can turn off the suggesting, and this means when you're typing a search you actually see an illustrative drop-down of options. Our accelerators, we can see those, and if we select them, we can disable or remove selectively depending upon our security options. There's the one I downloaded, Map with Yahoo. We can just disable it or, as I said, remove it if we don't like it. And then in private filtering, depending upon any rules that have been activated, we can take a look at those and actually export your filtering lists for sharing on other computers. To take a look at our digital certificates, we can open the Tools menu, come down to Internet Options, and as we make our way over to the appropriate page, which in this case is the content page, I don't want to give short shrift to cookies. The privacy page here looks very much like it did in Internet Explorer 6 and 7. You can import privacy preferences to customize this with a single click. We can override automatic cookie handling by just saying in a very blanket way to accept, block, or prompt first and or third-party cookies. We can adjust the slider, and you'll notice that the slider has help text to explain what's happening. On this page, we can also manage the pop-up blocker as well as in private. To look at the certificate store, we can come to the content page, and in the certificates area, click Certificates, and this gives us a view of the certificate store for the currently logged on user and also certificates for the computer. Personal is where user-specific certificates are going to be dunked. We're interested in the Trusted Root Certification Authority, certainly, and some of these names should be very familiar to you. Some of them are from Microsoft, others are from VeriSign. VeriSign is actually the Trusted Root Certification Authority that signs Microsoft certificates. We have Thought. Trusted Publishers is going to be where you deploy your certificates for signed code, and then we have Untrusted Publishers. You might be wondering, why is Microsoft in here? Well, back in 2002, a VeriSign employee accidentally, he or she probably lost their job for this, dispensed Microsoft.com code signing certificates not once but twice to a party who is fraudulent and obviously not Microsoft. So I would hope that every Windows system in the world has these certificates in its untrusted publishers list. Final thing we're going to look at in this demo is group policy. I opened up my local group policy editor. We'll remember that's gpedit.msc from the run prompt. We'll see these same policies on a Windows Server 2008 R2 machine for deployment on a domain. But the idea is the same. We're going to browse under Computer Configuration, Windows Components, Internet Explorer. And you see just a tremendous number of policies here. At the ground level, do not allow users to enable or disable add-ons, turn on the menu bar by default, turn off ActiveX opt-in prompt. I mean, look at all these policies. You could really spend a lot of time here customizing how Internet Explorer behaves on that computer. Not only do we have all these individual policies, but then we have folders for accelerators, compatibility view, corporate settings, the delete functionality. That's something I didn't mention actually. Let me bring Internet Explorer back again. An alternative to the in-private browsing is just to come to delete browsing history. And notice we have really rich control over what we delete. For instance, you might want to delete everything except saved form data and passwords because you find these really convenient. So I just wanted to mention that. There's our in-private filtering and browsing settings, Internet Control Panel, all of those options from the advanced page. And then of course the security page is where you can customize your security zones. It's almost overwhelming actually, the number of group policies that are available for Internet Explorer 8. Very final thing is I went out on the web, did a search for IEAK 8, downloaded this. It's a free package. It's an MSI installer, 2 megabytes, tiny little program. You'll note here that it runs on a client OS, so you could set up your package from your administrative workstation. EEK has almost always included these 2 components. There's the Profile Manager that allows you to manage your configuration packages. I don't have any, so it's not allowing me to do anything. And then the other piece is the Internet Explorer Customization Wizard, and this is where you actually create your custom packages. So you specify a builds folder, you specify your platform. You'll notice that you have to create a package for different OS platforms. So you might have one for Windows XP SP3, and then you have another one for Windows Vista x64. Hence the importance of the EEK Profile Manager. What's your target language? How are you deploying? File-based, which would be the most common for group policy installation, CD-ROM with auto-run, or configuration only, where you're just customizing the settings, you're not actually installing. And basically all these options should look familiar. You're essentially pre-populating all of those group policy settings and just customizing them for your new build. So we won't go any further with that. I just wanted to give you a flavor of the Internet Explorer Administration Kit and how powerful it is. Solving IE8 security issues review. We covered quite a bit of ground in this nugget, and I hope you're much more well-grounded in this latest version of Internet Explorer than you were prior to watching this nugget. We looked at security zones, paying attention to trusted sites and all of their ramifications. We did a pretty thorough feature overview of Internet Explorer 8, looking at new and advanced options in the browser with an eye toward security administration. We spent some time looking at add-in management, digital certificates and how they function, and then enterprise management with group policy and the IEAK. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.